Atlanta Falcons. I kind of want to save them for the
Yeah.
end. There's so much to talk about with the Falcons. We got the Falcons and the Bucks remaining. Atlanta Falcons, man, they make waves. They go Jalen Walker in the first round, the edge rusher / linebacker out of Georgia. And then they trade back into the first round, give up a future one to get James Pierce Jr., the edge out of Tennessee at pick 26. Next pick is in the third round toward the end. Xavier Watts from Notre Dame, the safety. They go Billy Bowman Jr. out of Oklahoma, another safety in round 4. And then Wisconsin offensive tackle Jack Nelson in the 5th. So only 5 selections here for the Falcons. And they gave up next year's first round pick. Your thoughts on the Atlanta Falcons?
I mean, wildly fascinating draft and wildly fascinating process because, they end up, big picture, they end up coming out of the first round with both Jalen Walker and James Pierce Jr. I mean, I don't think there was any scenario where anybody thought that was possible for any team. And to achieve that is pretty impressive. Now, obviously, in order to make that happen, you have to give up next year's first round draft pick. So it's a little bit like, Houston a couple of years ago where they were like, well, we also want Will Anderson Jr. Let's go trade for him and let's give away next year's first round draft pick. Now, the difference is obviously when the Houston Texans did that, they had drafted a quarterback first. When the Falcons did it, they had drafted another edge rusher already. It's like, it's one thing to be like, well, we want to get greedy and we want this guy too. But the first guy we took is a different player at a different position addressing a different need. It's another thing entirely to be like, well, we already kind of addressed this spot with the first pick, but we really like this guy. So let's go get him again and give up next year's first to do it. So the Falcons over the last few years now are just giving us a whole world of like unique case studies, which is fascinating to me.
The Michael Penix Jr. draft him when you already have Kirk Cousins case study. And now let's see 2 edge rushers. This is what it is for me. And we'll go back into the why and what they have. But Jalen Walker described as the pristine citizen, got to have this guy on the team, unbelievable character. The players who had their character raved about during this process include him, Jalen Milroe, Emeka Ibuka. So they add Jalen Walker, who's only rushed the passer about 300-something times, has shown flashes, but there's some projectability to his game. And then there's James Pierce Jr., who I would say unbelievable pass rush win rate. So I would say he's been productive in college, high pass rush grade from PFF. Maybe doesn't finish plays great, but has the character concerns, football character concerns, doesn't love the game, doesn't pay attention enough, doesn't care, whatever it might be. And now they play the same position and they're in the same room. And they're both first rounders. And obviously the Falcons, like, to go make that move for Pierce, you have to assume they loved him enough at 15. And my theory was Jalen Walker had been mocked so many times to Carolina at 8, maybe the Saints at 9, maybe the Niners at 11, and he keeps dropping. And I wonder if the Falcons were just like, man, Walker, we weren't expecting Jalen Walker to be here. Let's get him. And then we have such an edge rush need, right? They traded a 3. Why did they not have picks? They traded a 3 for Matthew Judon before last year, and Judon did absolutely nothing. They still had one of the worst pass rushes last year. And so they had such a need. They said, let's double up. Let's double up on it. So the most fascinating things to me coming out of this is doubling up at edge, but then the 2-year haul of Jalen Walker, James Pierce, and last year's Braylon Trice, Brandon Dorless, throw Rook Aroraro at defensive tackle in there. That's 5 pretty significant draft picks on defensive linemen for a team that needs to rush the passer better, 4 on the edge. And so if they don't do it this year, man, I mean, it's going to be, it's going to be fascinating to see the Falcons and their aggressiveness here.
It is. And part of this is like, what exactly was the thought process and the process generally with this? I kind of agree that I think that they didn't really expect Jalen Walker to be there at 15, that, he was the chalky pick at Carolina at number 8, a bunch of picks before. So I think there's definitely a plausible idea that they just hadn't really. Now, look, teams game all this out. They run mock drafts. They run different scenarios. It had to have crossed their mind, but I don't think they really thought it was likely that he would be available. And it probably changed who they were planning on picking at that spot. So you bring in Jalen Walker, fascinating college prospect, very low in experience, was a true hybrid player where he was playing off the ball linebacker and edge rusher. I think he's best as an edge rusher. I think if you make him a full-time edge and just let him cook, he'll be really good, despite the fact that he's a little bit undersized. He's not a prototype size and he's low in experience. He's powerful. He's got moves. He's got bend. He's got the pass rushing chops. I think that's a good first round draft pick. Then you get, well, how do we get from there to coming back into the first round for James Pierce Jr. and coughing up next year's first to make it happen, as well as some other bits and pieces in that trade? That's where it gets really interesting to me, because in order to justify that, you have to basically say that you value James Pierce Jr. at the same kind of range that you took Jalon Walker at, right? You have to basically say we were prepared to take James Pierce there, but because Walker was there, we decided he was better, took him, but we still think James Pierce is worth that 15 spot. And so once we get to like pick 25, 26, like now we think this is actually good value and we have to go and make the trade back in order to make it happen. So I think it says how good they think James Pierce Jr. is, which is also interesting because of the off-field concerns that people had about James Pierce. And when I say off-field, it's work ethic. It's, is he going to put 100% of himself into being a professional NFL football player, right? Or is he going to, skip out on meetings? Is he going to skip out on work? Is he going to understand the playbook fully in terms of learning it, right? Can you keep him together, basically, right? Can you keep him together to get the football player on the field? Because that guy is awesome. I think that's the one element where I agree with them. And I was sort of saying at some point, you shouldn't overthink James Pierce, right? At some point, you should say he has been exceptionally productive, even with all of these concerns. The dude has been one of the most productive pass rushers, not just in this draft, but in the last few drafts. And we shouldn't overlook that, right? Now, I don't know if I would have said, let's not overlook it. Let's go trade next year's first. And let's value him that high. But when we were thinking about him as a guy who could fall out of the first round, I was like, look, he's still a first round player, independent of the off-field concerns. I would still draft that guy in the first round sometime because he's been so productive. They took that to a whole new level and said, we're not just still drafting him, but we're still valuing him as like a top half of the first round player.
And that's why I say, as a case study, I would make the argument right now, James Pierce is a better edge rusher than Jalon Walker. I would say, PFF grades, which I think translate pretty well as far as pass rushers go. Jalon Walker pass rush grade 83 and 86 over the last 2 years. James Pierce 91 and 89. Again, the question for you is, or for us, is maybe finishing or, some of the plays, letting quarterbacks break contain, where Walker is fantastic. Another fun case study. But Pierce, as far as winning one-on-ones, which I think is more difficult, he's the guy, man. He was thought of as a top 10 caliber player, maybe top 1 caliber player. His movement skills are out of this world. So they're different style players. And the perception around the league was probably different trajectories, where maybe Pierce isn't going to reach that potential, but Walker has the character, football character, and everything to reach it. So now they get them both in the same building. And if they both hit, it is a home run. They're swinging for a grand slam here, Sam, if you know your baseball. In addition to when teams do this, they moved up 20 spots, 46 to 26, and gave up that extra one. The reasoning is always, this is next year's first round pick today. This is next year's first round pick right now. The risk in that, of course, is it's not really that, because you gave up your 2 this year. So it's really next year's 1.
It is,
this
but
year's 2.
It's added to the second round that you're giving up.
It always comes down to, you expect this player to be worth at least 2 or 3 players, depending on how the trade unfolds. So it's an aggressive, bold move by the Falcons. But for a team that had one of the worst pass rushes in the NFL, to the point where they had to start using Caden Ellis as like a, blitzer, and, they had to do a whole bunch of gaga, as they call it, in the second, right? Disguise, and they just had to do a lot to get any kind of pressure on the quarterback. Maybe they can rush with 4 now, especially when you add Braylon Trice. They have Leonard Floyd there, who's a good 3. They have way more juice off the edge than they did last year at this time. We'll see how it all comes together. Hey guys, just taking a quick break to tell you, hey, just over 50% of you are still unsubscribed to Check the Mic. It helps the channel. It helps to make sure that you don't miss any of our shows. So if you have a chance, hit the subscribe button right now.
Yeah, it's really fascinating because I agree with their on-field evaluation. I think James Pierce Jr. belongs in the middle of the first round in this draft if you're viewing it strictly on the field. I think that's also true for Mike Green, though he slipped for an entirely different set of off-field issues. But I think all of those guys, and this is what we were saying when we were talking about where do these edge rusher goes, where do they go? Would they go to Carolina 8? Like, which one of these teams is going to pick which edge rusher? And it's like, if you want to ignore that guy's red flag, or you decide that that's not a problem, you clear him effectively. Any of those guys kind of belong in the middle of the first round. So from that point of view, I agree with their assessment, but I had never envisaged a world where they had already drafted Jalen Walker with that spot. And they then wanted the guy so much that they're willing to not only overlook the off-field concerns for him, but also then give up next year's first to trade back and get a guy when you've already targeted that position. So they didn't just double up a position, which itself would be, notable, right? If they come back in the second round and drafted an edge rusher, that would be getting people at least raising their eyebrows. They didn't just do that. They did it for a guy who has, attitude, professionalism type concerns, and they gave up next year's first to do it. So it's shocking / surprising in 3 separate ways, which is exactly like the Michael Penix Jr. thing last year. Like, they are, for 2 straight years, the Falcons have done something basically unprecedented.
I love it. That's what I love about it. I mean, that was my take coming out of the Michael Penix thing, which was, and I liked the Penix move probably more than this one. Like, as far as which one would I opt into, it's over investing in the quarterback position versus maybe giving up the future one and maybe giving up too many picks when we have some other depth needs or whatever. But I love it, man. Case studies, more case studies. These are fun. Falcons are giving us some fun stuff. I also like the other players that they got, particularly Xavier Watts in the 3rd round. That looks like an absolute steal. He reminded me of Kirby Joseph. He went 1 pick ahead of where Kirby Joseph was drafted a few years ago, the Lions safety. And I think Watts has similar ball magnet type of abilities, ball skills. I don't think he's the greatest athlete in the world, but I think he's fine. I think he can cover tight ends. Just dependable player, always seems to be in the right place at the right time. And a lot of people did have, and here's some perspective, I guess. Did they give up a 2 and a 1 essentially for Pierce? Yes. A lot of people had the Falcons, though, drafting edge in the 1st and then Xavier Watts in the 2nd. And you walk away with that. And it's like, oh, that's not bad. Yeah. Kind of came. So they come away with 2 edges and a Xavier Watts. I'm just saying, if before a week ago, if you said, here's what they're going to come away with, that would have been a pretty good haul. So I think those top 3 players really have a chance to overhaul this defense. Then Billy Bowman has some slot / safety ability coming out of Oklahoma. They've added some talent to the defensive side here. Yeah,
it's a fascinating draft. And of course, the other thing in this is for 2 straight years, they've been slapped on the wrist by the NFL for something. They didn't have a 5th round draft pick this year because they forfeited it because of the Kirk Cousins tampering, right? Where he accidentally basically let slip to the press that he'd been talking directly to them as opposed to through his agent, which is an absurd line to be drawing in the sand, but nonetheless one that the NFL does draw in the sand. So that's how they lost a 5th round draft pick. And then coming out of this draft, they've been fined $250,000, and Jeff Ulbrich has been fined $100,000 for leaking unintentionally the number of Shedeur Sanders to cop that the prank.
I think that's ridiculous that he's been fined for that. Ulbrich.
I mean, I don't mind like the team being fined is fine because it's, a giant multi-billion organization. Who the hell cares? The Jeff Ulbrich individually being fined for his son effectively stealing his laptop or his iPad to get the number for it. I mean, on the one hand, it's harsh. On the other hand, there's sensitive stuff on there. Maybe lock your iPad.
Data security, fine. I don't know. Because if he doesn't make the phone call, he doesn't get fined, but he still had the same data security issue.
Yeah.
So it's literally the actions of his son that get him fined for $100,000, which is absurd. That's all. That's absurd. And I think the people calling for a fine also zip it.
The people.
That's
so, I mean, I don't really care that they fined either of them. I think both of them can take the fine and be fine. I think the people that were calling for Jeff Ulbrich's job are out of their minds. Like the dude's kid effectively boosted his iPad and stole the phone number from it. I mean, you want Jeff Ulbrich fired for that? That's ridiculous.
I would say A, be mad at the kid for doing it, and then B, just think back. I'm not saying you would have done this. I'm not saying 21-year-old you would have done the same thing as a kid, but just think back to 21-year-old you. Think back to a couple things you may have done that you were not proud of. Just saying. Get off your high horse, everybody.
Well, not just that,
Definitely not job worthy.
but also start thinking about that in connection with the kids that are being drafted and being talked about as having, attitude or making mistakes. Like, so
Yeah.
the kid that pranked Shador Sanders and Shador Sanders, right? Like Shador's getting ripped apart and said he's not worthy of being a quarterback in the NFL and he doesn't belong and he shouldn't be drafted and yada, 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 for potential lapses in judgment for being the same age as the kid that did an even dumber thing and got his dad fined $100,000. And like, kids at that age do stupid things, right? But because they're athletes, we're like, they're supposed to be perfect and ready to go right out of the gate. And this is true for James Pierce Jr. as well, right? Like he's at an age where he should be doing stupid things. And it's incumbent on the Falcons now to like keep him together and piece him back together and make sure that he becomes, the model professional that they need him to be at the next level. But we do tend to forget that kids that are 19, 20, 21 years old are generally not mature and shouldn't be.
But the difference is you're asking them. I'm not saying you need to criticize every last thing, but the teams have to account for all that because you're asking them to be mature professionals in 6 months or as of now. So You're asking them a high standard where like the average 21-year-old can do whatever job he wants, where maybe he can, act foolish for the next 5 years and then figure it out or whatever. Like football players don't have that ability. You're paying them for the next 4 years a lot of money to be mature. That's why that stuff has to be broken down, even if it's over the top sometimes.
You have to.
I mean, to put that out there.
You have to factor it in. What I'm saying is we need to be careful. Like the moral judgment on it is a different thing. Like as an NFL franchise, you have to evaluate how mature is this kid because we're about to hand him a boatload of money. And if he's immature and going to continue a pattern of mistakes and making bad decisions, we might end up wasting that money and wasting a draft pick and getting nothing in return for it, right? So the NFL teams have to evaluate that stuff and say, how likely is this guy to keep it together at the next level versus how likely is it to become this year's Jermaine Burton, right? Like that's the risk, because if he's not going to keep it together, he's Jermaine Burton this year and we just wasted money and a draft pick. But I think that this thinking is as media or as people analyzing this from the outside, people, I think, rush to moral judgments on it, right? Like we can talk about, and James Pierce is a solid example of this. Like we can bring up the concerns that people have about whether he's going to be a good professional, whether he's going to put the effort in, whether he's going to, give everything he has to be the player that he can be. But there's a distinction between that and saying that's a very real risk for anybody drafting him in the first round and saying, being too moralistically judging about it, because most people were stupid when they were in their early 20s, right? Or late teens. It's just a reality of the world. Most people are not mature at that stage. They do dumb things. And if everything you did at that age in your life was on video or sent to people on a cell phone, you would not come out of that particularly well. I think so. Again, be careful throwing stones from your glass house is the point I would make there.
Yeah, like it. Just to put a bow on the Falcons, 26 on Renee Buchner's consensus, ranging from people A- to D. So wide range here for the Falcons in their process. D- actually. A- to a D-. I thought it was interesting. Case studies, fun for the second straight year for the Falcons.
Thanks for watching all the way to the end of our video.
For more great content, click here to subscribe and here to watch another video. We'll see you again soon.